where I will read verse 11 as a beginning point. And the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. That's Acts 23, verse 11. Paul was concluding his time now in Jerusalem. He had been taken prisoner, falsely accused. The Jews sought his life. The Romans obliged the Jewish hierarchy by taking Paul a prisoner. But the Lord, in the night, comes to him and says, Be of good cheer. I can think in some measure how Paul might have felt all that I wanted to do, and now I'm in captivity. So many I was desirous of preaching the gospel to. Others I desired to see and fortify and so on. And now it looks like Satan has pitched in on me. But the Lord shows him otherwise. Paul, this is not the end. This is just another stepping stone in the path. Be of good cheer, that you've testified of me in Jerusalem, and you must testify of me in Rome also. So I would ask you, before moving on from this verse, do you believe there was any likelihood that Paul would somehow fail of testifying of Jesus in Rome? It was the Lord's purpose. And it was the Lord's good pleasure to work out that purpose as seems good to Him. We'll leave that thought for the moment with this comment. Everything is intertwined. What affects one person in one remote portion of the world must, of necessity, affect some other person in another remote portion of the world. It might not be readily seen, but it is so. If the Lord wills, and purposes, I would like to show from the experience of Paul following this how these things unfold in harmony. You will recall that while Paul was a prisoner, he was subject to the scrutiny of Felix and of Festus and of Agrippa and his sniveling wife Bernice as well. But he was given a thorough examination. The conclusion was this: we don't find any cause worthy of death in this man. They would have set him free, they said. The only reason they kept him as long as they did was to do the Jews a favor. But Paul said, I appeal to Caesar. That locked them in. By their law, Paul was on his way to Rome. You might say he just handed himself a bus ticket, because it was now the business of the Roman Empire to see that this man, who was, after all, a Roman citizen of the free city of Tarsus, was delivered safely to the court of Caesar to be heard. Now turn, if you will, to chapter 27. There is no possible way that in the time we have this morning, or many other mornings combined, that we could go through all of this interesting story. But I would like to highlight several of the incidents here for you that would somehow, to some degree, direct towards the point I would make. And when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus's band. Do you notice the word we? If you've read the book of the book of Acts carefully, you will notice that the we begins when Luke, the physician, begins keeping company with the Apostle Paul. When Paul boarded this ship, as it was determined for him to go to Rome, Luke was with him. He's the we that speaks there. Paul was not totally alone on this ship as far as spiritual companionship was concerned. Verse 2, there was another man, Aristarchus, the Macedonian of Thessalonica, was also, as he said, with us. Now, this wasn't a little rowboat. You look in verse 37, we were all in the ship 216 souls. Now, this is after all the second ship he was in, but at least there was that many in the first ship also. 276 persons. For 2,000 years ago, that was a relatively large seafaring vessel. At least 101 of them were soldiers. That is, the centurion Julius and his 100 soldiers. There was 3 that we know of on board that were believing Christians. The rest, no doubt, were mariners of some sort, seamen, the proprietor of the ship, and so forth. But this is the point. The Lord had ordained that the Apostle Paul preach the beloved gospel in Rome. His means of arriving there would be by ship. All that was necessary for Paul to go was involved in this. And every one of these people were affected by the purpose of God to deliver Paul to Rome. Do you see what I'm saying here? What may occur to Brother Clark, to some measure or another, affects everyone else. You may not see it, but it does. Follow some of the emphasis I make here now. Verse 4. When we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus because the winds were contrary. The winds were contrary. Verse 7. When we'd sailed slowly many days and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed under Crete over against Salmon. Do you see how that it looks like things from the very outset were contrary? Even the winds were against them. Now, if you had a map and were interested, you could see that they sailed from the coasts of what's now Palestine, city of Caesarea. They sailed almost due north to the island of Cyprus, and it says they sailed under that, and they went up into what is now the coast of Turkey, sailed west from that, over across the coast of Greece, and then south down to the island of Crete, and it was there that they stopped in what is called the Fair Havens. And we'll take up there. Verse 8, and hardly passing it came unto a place which is called the Fair Havens, nigh whereunto was the city of Lasea. Now when much time was spent, when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them. The fast, of course, was about October the 10th. It was the fall of the year. It was beginning to be the dangerous season for one to try to sail a ship from that area into Italy. And Paul, a man of some great reputation even already among these people, admonished them and said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only to the lading of the ship, but also of our lives. This may be a little contrary to ordinary predestinarian thinking, but it's the truth nevertheless. The Apostle Paul knew he was going to Rome. And he probably was reasonably certain this was the vessel to take him there. But he also was a man of good intelligence and common sense. And he was not a man that would fly in the face of circumstances and say, well, it don't matter. However it's fixed is how it will be. Now, there is truth in that. How it's fixed, it will be. But that was not the apostle's attitude. You know, there's a difference between truth and between attitude. We may take the truth and wrongfully apply it. We may take error and rightfully apply it. And neither one of them are correct. The Apostle Paul recognized that this was a dangerous business. And that even though he believed that God would protect him and those with him, he felt a compulsion to warn and to apprise these individuals that this was going to be a hazardous mission if they attempted to sail after the fast. Now I would ask you this, having the Apostle Paul as an example in such a thing, can we say that his attitude was wrong? I cannot. I could go into many areas of life that I will pass up, but let me just mention one. We hear our liberal politicians informing us often how many lives are saved by seatbelts. I don't believe that they know any more than I do about that. It's all speculation, conjecture, based upon assumptions and crunching of figures and so forth. And so they determine in themselves that it must be the law that I wear a seatbelt. Now this is the kind of paradox here. I'm opposed to the law, but I'm in favor of wearing a seatbelt. Do you follow what I'm saying? I don't like to be told and mandated how I conduct myself under things that are not someone else's business, but I believe it reasonable for anyone with common sense to wear a seatbelt, especially with all the fools on the highway. We're probably the only ones that aren't fools on the highway here this morning. It is not unreasonable to care for oneself, to avoid harm's way when God enables us to. I doubt that there is any in our little assembly this morning that would fail to go to a doctor if they discovered something within a symptom of a dreaded disease. We wouldn't say, well, if I'm to die with this, I'm a goner. That may be true, but I sure would like to go get some medication and relieve the symptoms as best I could on the way, wouldn't you? What I am saying is that it is not incompatible with the doctrine of the government of God for the children of God to act in a sane manner. The Apostle Paul did, and I believe it to be proper. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than the things which were spoken of Paul. It fell on deaf ears. And Paul probably knew beforehand it would fall on deaf ears, but it didn't stop him from saying it. I hope that each of you will be blessed to give that some thought in time to come. And because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart. You know, we could park right there and leave spiritual things for a moment and talk about natural things, but it makes some common sense. What were these people looking for? They were willing to gamble their lives for convenience. Fair haven was not so fair to them after all. They didn't want to spend a winter in this flea-bitten trap, is what it amounted to. We know if we can go on over here to Lycia, to the northeast and the northwest, up the coast a little ways, we will have far better pickings for the winter. Let's go up there. And probably a lot of the sailors knew this was a good port for sailors to winter in too. So let's go up here. The flesh was reasoning against those safeguards that we have in our intellect. You know what prevailed. They went on. Now look at verse 13. The Lord willing will be to the heart of the matter in just a minute. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence, they sailed close by Crete. Brethren, two things there, God's children especially would be well to be wary of. Watch out when the south winds gently blow. Many a person has mistaken signs for an open door. Well, it sure does look good. I don't mean natural south winds. Do you understand what I'm saying? Beware when it looks like the door is open. These individuals saw the gentle breezes from the south blowing, which was contrary to the time. And they, secondly, supposed. Supposing is a dangerous thing for anyone, any time. Facts are one thing, suppositions are another. Do you recall when, y'all excuse me this morning, got about 3 frogs in my throat. None of them will move. Moses supposed his brethren would have understood. And the scripture says, but they understood not. Supposing is one of our more dangerous businesses that we engage in. And these individuals supposed that the fair winds from the south meant all is well, let's go. Not always so. So they went. And then we can come to the heart. But, verse 14, not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. And now we see the storm in their life. One man that we know of was ordained to go to Rome. 275 other people were affected by God's purpose in bringing the one man to Rome. Now, what the purpose in the lives of the others was, we do not know. We are not informed by the Scriptures, but recognize if there was a purpose in the lives of each of them. As there is a purpose in your life. You don't know what it is either. But in the life of every being who has ever been born in this world, there are purposes worthy of God. And they intertwine with the purposes of every other one, and God is capable and able and does bring them all together in absolute harmony from the first Adam that lived until the last human that will ever leave this earth. But now it was not long after till a tempestuous wind arose. It was called Euroclydon. You go back in the old languages, you'll discover that Euroclidon comes from, at least in part, words which means a typhoon. But not a typhoon like you would see that would skip across the bay somewhere and be gone. But a typhoon of duration. A typhoon of long-lasting, a tempest, a boiling, and a severe and serious agitation of the winds and of the waves, and the sweeping back and forth, and the total and the complete loss of control of a vessel. Euroclidon to these people was as bad as it could get. Notice then verse 15, and when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. Here is the first in a couple of things I would like to bring from this chapter. In our lives and in our journeys, even in the case of the Apostle Paul here on his way to Rome, there comes those areas where the Lord manifested to us in the most visible sense that we have no power. We have no control. There is nothing we can do about what is occurring. All these sailors, these brilliant men, and mark this well, even though it's 2,000 years ago, these people knew how to sail a ship. They were brilliant as far as being seafarers, especially the Phoenicians of that day. They had mastered, as far as the capacity had led them in that day, to traveling by sea. But there was nothing for these people to do under the hand, the superintending hand of God in this matter, but let her drive. The ship was at the mercy of the elements. And brethren, when you come to a place like that, you know absolute and total helplessness. Have any of you ever been there? I'm sure you have in some way or another. Sometimes we're in those experiences physically. Sometimes we're in them spiritually. And they're both very bad. May I give you just one of my own? Occurred just several weeks ago. Of the feeling of complete, total helplessness. We'd been to Phoenix to visit our son, to visit the church out there in Las Vegas. We flew back to Philadelphia, and when we got back here, there was a storm, a bad one, a couple of weeks ago. I'm sure you all remember. Bad East Coast storm. Delayed several hours, but finally we got our little puddle-hopping commuter plane to Salisbury and flew through the worst storm I ever flew in my life. And about halfway down to Salisbury in that storm, I don't know whether the air pocket or whatever it is, the plane just fell. Just fell. I'm not talking about a little bump. I'm talking about, oh. Women screamed, men swore, and I was so frozen, I couldn't even think to pray. It is not a fear, it is an absolute helplessness. You don't even have time in an occasion like that to be afraid until you look back. But there was one thing that come to my mind absolutely immediately after. Now, it was only a few seconds that the plane fell, but it seemed like an hour. But afterward was that I'm absolutely helpless. That if the Lord don't get me down out of this storm, I won't get down. And it just nearly cured me of flying. Probably I will fly again, but it nearly cured me. It's a feeling that you have to experience to be able to relate. Absolute helplessness. But I would tell you this, that there's one worse than that. And that is spiritual helplessness. When sudden fear seizes the soul and grabs a hold of one, that they know that they stand before a God who has created and declared, and that if God is not pleased to show mercy and grace, there is nothing for them but the total blackness of darkness forever. When a poor sinner has ever been there, he knows spiritually what these people knew when they had to let the ship drive. There they were, in the tempest called Euroclydon. They couldn't do anything about it. The worst place in the world would be in the storm, and they couldn't get out of the storm. They were there until it was over. All they could do is ride it out. And in a sense, that's the journey of life. We're in it to the end, for better or worse. That was the first episode. They were without power and they let her drive. But there's a second episode in the next verse. And running under a certain island which is called Claudia, we had much work to come by the boat. Now don't mistake the boat here with the ship that they were in. The boat was the little lifeboat that they drug along behind the ship. That, you might say, was their parachute. That was their preserver. In the event that the ship was torn up, they had that to resort to. And so above all else, they wanted this safety measure in the ship with them. Do you see what I'm talking about? To give you another example, pardon me for using personal ones, but they're the only ones I know. I talked about flying a while ago. The first time I ever flew was about 40 years ago. More than that, I guess, 42 or 3. Got on a plane out in California to fly to Colorado Springs. I was in the Army and they were sending me home from Korea. I'd been on there 5 or 10 minutes and they're just about getting ready to take off, and I asked somebody in charge, I don't know, a steward or a stewardess, it's been so long ago I can't remember. But I asked when they were going to hand out the parachutes. They said they don't hand out parachutes. Said it wouldn't do you any good. But I couldn't believe that there wasn't some safety measure in case this airplane got in a bad fix up there, I couldn't jump out. See, you're in it. And that was the lesson I learned real swift right then. Here these people were, they were in it, but they put out a lot of effort to get a parachute. In this case, the little boat that was behind them. Because if this ship broke up, they wanted a secondary measure to secure their lives. So I would perceive that oftentimes the children of the heavenly King, when they're brought into a place to where they must let her drive, they begin to look about for a little ship that they can have as a safety measure. Most classic example I ever saw, that was an individual who I don't know whether he was a child of God or not. He professed to be. He believed in salvation by grace as firm as any man I ever saw. Preached it. Then one day he up jumped Johnny and joined a group of people that believed you had to be baptized to go to heaven. I went to him at his place of employment one day and I said, Elder so-and-so, did you do what I've heard? Yes, I did. I said, why? He said, well, I tell you. He said, if I was right beforehand, I'm safe. If I'm right now, I'm safe. He said, I wanted something I could put my thumb on. I thought to myself, well, so much for the just shall live by faith. But at any rate, that was the way he felt about it. And to me, it exactly paralleled what was taking place with these people. They put a lot of effort into a situation trying to get this little boat in the big ship with them in case the big ship went down. Now, tell me, does it make good sense to think that if the big ship can't make it in the storm, the little ship is going to make it in the storm? But that's the way they looked at things. They wanted a life raft. When they had to let her drive, the next thing was expend a little effort to try to secure ourselves. But it goes on. And when they had taken up, they used helps. We don't have to say much there, do we? The old Armenian flesh is going to use every help it can get its hand on. Undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksand, straight sail, and so were driven. Now, you know, in that day, they did use helps to undergird a ship. They actually used ropes, which they took from the front end of the ship and wrapped them around and so forth. And they did, to a degree or another, bind the ship while it was twisting in storms like this. And many a ship was saved by it. But you rest assured of this one thing. If they had driven into the quicksands there on the coast of Libya, where they were close to at that time, wasn't no help's going to save them. Because they're going to be sucked into it and gone, because it was a graveyard for many a ship. But there they was again, being driven, and so were driven, it said. But the next verse to me is the real capper for our nature. And we, being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. Do you see a spiritual parallel there? Lightening the ship. Boy, it's time to get rid of all of our bad garbage. Time to get rid of our excess baggage. Time to cull out and shed off. Lord, just get me out of this fix. I'll never smoke another cigarette. Lord, just save me from this disease. I'll never drink another drink of whiskey. Lord, preserve me from this danger I'm in. I'll never look at another woman with a wanton eye again. And all of this kind of business that man has been doing for thousands of years, lightening their ship, trying to get rid of everything that would secure them more so than what they had been before. And lightening the ship is a prevalent manner of all people when they discover that they really were carrying a lot of Babylonian garments with them that wasn't really necessary. But the one thing they'll soon discover is even lightening the ship isn't going to help. It simply will not work. The third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. Some question about what the tackling was. And making a difference what it was. They were trying to get rid of stuff. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. It wasn't gone, it was taken away. The circumstances took it away. Here they were without hope. Now, as I said, there was 276 of them. And I don't know what the Apostle Paul's mind was at that time, but I get the indication that even Paul believed possibly he was going to die in that ship. You say, well, Paul had assurances that he was going to preach in Rome. Yes, and John the Baptist had assurances that Jesus Christ had come to be baptized of him was the Lamb of God. And he said, behold the Lamb of God which taketh away the sin of the world. And then turned around in prison when he was about to be beheaded and sent his disciples and said, art thou he that should come, or should we look for another? Even John the Baptist began to doubt when the lively things of life were taken from him and his circumstances had altered and he was staring death in the face. He was examining. And brethren, examination is not bad. Examine yourselves, Paul said, to see whether you be in the faith, except you be reprobates. It is good when we are afflicted with the storms of life, when you rock with and rises against us, and after we've thrown everything out, and after we've done everything we can do, and all hope is taken away. Then, brethren, examination becomes to be a serious matter. We see ourselves for what we are. Totally helpless, totally without strength, gone world without end, unless a deliverance comes from a source outside of ourselves. I wish that I hadn't piddled around so much getting up to this subject, but I offer another thought or two and conclude. But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, sirs, you should have hearkened unto me. Was he rebuking them? No. He was bringing to their minds that Paul was a man of perception. You should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. The vessel which is going to take you from one harbor to another will be lost, but the lives will be saved, is what he's saying. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. Wasn't it a joyous time for Paul? Now this was the message given to Paul. It didn't come down out of the clouds. It didn't break the storm and all 276 of them hear this. God gave the message to the messenger. And the messenger gave the message to those that were in the ship with him. They didn't all believe. They didn't all realize it, and they didn't all find the joy in it Paul did, but he was told the same thing then that he was told originally in Jerusalem. Be of good cheer, Paul. Your life is safe. And he said, not only this, but I've given you all that sail with thee. What a blessing it must have been to him to know that in the midst of the storm, in the great deep here, while you rocklet and blows all about us, we can't see the sun, the stars, the moon, anything. Despair is before us. We've lightened the ship. Everything is done that can be done, and nothing avails, but God will save us. You see how opposite he is from poor old Jonah when he was in the ship. But nevertheless, they both, servants of the Most High, and God, in His order and purpose, brought them both to the place where each of them were to be in the final analysis. I trust that each of you would, if the Lord would bless, go home and read the remainder of this chapter and see the comforting, interesting, powerful thoughts that attend this after Paul receives this message, and how that his life is secured even when the soldiers would put him to death, lest fearing he get away and they have to stand in his place. And how the centurion was moved by God to protect his life. And how that all of this worked out to the glory of God and the good of His people, and all of those others, you might say, were, as far as this scene is concerned, but incidental players. But rest assured of this one thing. Just as Paul and Luke and Aristarchus and the 273 others on board that ship endured that, God had a purpose worthy of Himself in all of it. And He does in our lives, though we may not fully realize it at the time or see it as clearly as it's recorded concerning Paul. The Lord bless you to think upon these things to some measure.